Welcome to Minority Caucus. My name is Akbar Ruhullah Khomeini. The biggest issue in Ghana today is threatening the future of young people is unemployment. The World Bank estimated that over 48% of Ghanaians are unemployed and almost 19% are actively looking for jobs they cannot find. The NPP presidential candidate, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, has promised to tackle the issue of unemployment with a sense of urgency. He promised to build a robust economy driven by industrialization in order to create decent jobs for decent pay. And Akufo-Addo further promised to revamp agriculture, which recorded 0.04% growth in 2015. As part of measures to create huge job opportunities, the NPP is promising to reduce taxes and to introduce what it termed tax cuts for jobs in order to motivate the private sector to hire Ghanaian young graduates. We'll go for a quick break, and when we return, I will introduce my guests. Welcome back. Before I proceed to introduce my guests, I'll urge viewers to take a look at this interview with an IMF official.
Cycles of fiscal slippages and spending overrun. But so far, we have seen the authorities sticking fully to the fiscal discipline and trying to achieve the fiscal objectives which were set under the program. The authorities at the highest level have reiterated their commitment to maintain this fiscal discipline. But I think they are conscious that if same mistakes were made as in the past, this could have pretty devastating consequences in terms of loss of investors' confidence and therefore financial difficulties for the government.
So we are optimistic, but that is based on sticking to certain conditions.
Absolutely, yes. This is basically sticking to the policy that the authorities have implemented since the start of the program and continuing with their efforts towards fiscal consolidation.
Another critical thing you talked about, even a team in Accra to look at the fiscal data for 2015 and even the first quarter of 2016. Now, I believe your policy recommendations and everything was based on this data. Now, if there are problems with this data, are your recommendations and everything wrong?
No, we have indeed noted some discrepancies in the fiscal reports, but this does not affect our assessment of the progress achieved so far. We currently have actually a team of experts looking into these issues in Accra, and they will make some recommendations on how to improve.
Welcome back. Tonight, I've been joined by Robert Ahonka Lindsay, a former CEO of Ghana Investment Promotion Council and former Vice President of Coca-Cola Africa. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, and great to be here with you.
Thank you, too. First of all, does Ghana have an economy robust enough to deliver jobs? If yes, why are we not dealing with the issue of unemployment?
That is what they call the elephant in the room, so to say, and because the fundamental question about our economy, how robust it is, what journey it's gone through, and how well we are positioned to do that is at the core of everything when we talk about creating jobs. Before I jump into the answer, can I just give you a little snapshot about what it looks like? I think in your introduction, you gave us a sense of the sorts of numbers we're looking at. But if I may, we have a population of about 26 million people in total. Out of that 26 million people, if you take out those that are too young, those that are in school, and those that are too old, we have roughly about 10 million people that are what we call of employable age. So they're able to provide productive input into our economy. So that, if you want, if you're looking at factors of production in terms of the economic principles, labor, we have 10 million. So there are 10 million people we are working with where we are. Of that 10 million people, at the most optimistic estimate, government can only employ about 6%.
Out of 10 million.
Out of 10, because we all know the engine of both employment and growth is not government. Government sets the parameters, but the engine of growth is the private sector. So what we are saying is that over 90-odd%, let's even be generous and take it to 10%, 90% of that 10 million will have to come from the private sector. So everything that we do, that we want to do, that we have been doing, that we're planning to do for employment must focus on how we can engage and make sure those 9 million people are employed. And I think that's what it comes down to. There are two particular reports I want to look at as we look at the current situation and what has happened. And I think to me as an economist, that is what is a tragedy. And that's the only word I can use for it. I think it's a tragedy in terms of what has happened over the past 8 years in our country. First of all, as an economist and somebody who's been to the same school as the IMF teams here, I feel embarrassment that I have to go to Washington to ask somebody to come and tell me about fiscal discipline.
Somebody something the same to
when we went to do the degree, the MBA, they didn't give one group for those that understood fiscal discipline and those that didn't understand it. Everybody got the same MBA or the degree. You either passed or you failed. And so I think on a personal level, it doesn't make me feel good. 57 years post-independence and say we can do our own thing, to then be in a position where we have to call somebody in to come and tell us, you need to do this, like a teacher pointing the finger. I don't like that. And I think that is one of the first tragedies. We thought we had weaned ourselves of this necessity to bring in a headmaster to come and teach us how to be fiscal disciplined. We should know how to do that by now. Putting that aside, why have we found ourselves over the past period? I talked about the 9 million. Here is another fact, an important fact. Over 80% of all employment is generated by small and medium-sized businesses. That means those companies that employ 10 people and less, are the ones that are employing 80% of everybody in the country. Not the large corporations like my old firm, Coke, or the larger ones. Those are the ones, they tend to be what we call pillars. So what they do is that they act as nucleus and bring other businesses in. But the bottom line is, globally, this is not unique to Ghana alone, whether I'm talking about the US, Germany, Britain, or Ghana. The vast majority of employment is created by small and medium-sized businesses. So it is the lady with the hairdressers, it is the seamstress with 5 or 6 people working through, it is my mechanic that I seem to have spent most of this afternoon with this afternoon, has 7 people employed to them. They are the people that are the engine, the true engine of employment. And they also, by the way, we always think that they only provide employment. They tend to be over half of all the investment that are made, capital investments in the country. So this is a very critical point. So anything you are doing to address employment, you must make sure that group is well taken care of. Not to the detriment of larger businesses, but you've got to make sure that group is well taken of. Now let's talk about what has happened to that group over the past 8 years. First of all, that group has been hit in every way possible by economic activity that seemed to have been designed to make life as difficult for them as possible to engage. Let me start with one. That group are the first ones that have been hit by taxes. Taxes that have hit them everywhere you turn, and we'll go through some of those in a bit more details, and I'll come to a bit more information. But the first and most critical aspect is macroeconomic instability. It should be stability, but it's instability. So if I am a lady who's got a hairdresser shop, and I used to be able to take 100 cedis to go and buy 10 those nice wigs they bring from Brazil or wherever else they come in, over the past period, because of what is happening through no fault of my own, through nothing that I have done or can control as a business, I have lost 30% of my purchasing power through exchange rate depreciation. Because in 2008, your 1 cedi bought you equivalent of what? $1 US. Today, at best, you can get 3.5, 3.7, depends where, 3.8, so it may even be worse. You have lost over 30+% of the value of your capital through no fault of your own. And you know how difficult capital is to get in this town. So it's disappeared. Why? Because you are having to buy overseas. Unfortunately, we don't make hair here. I wish we did, and that's part of what we need to address. So what has happened is that their capital base has eroded. They have not been able to triple their turnover, because in order to stay still, they've had to triple their turnover just to be able to stay on the same level. Very few, how many situations have people been able to increase their salary threefold to be able to buy the same thing that they did? So that becomes a critical area. The third area which is linked is the interest rates, the cost of borrowing. It's one of the key areas that has come out of cost of doing business. So let's look at Ghana. It is a fallacy. It is something that I have such difficulty understanding. Where today, out of the 138 countries that have been reported on the latest global competitive, Ghana is the third worst country.
Third worst.
Third worst in the world.
In the world.
The only ones that are worse than us are Malawi, which is only 27%, so it's not that much, and Argentina, which is 26.75%, we're 26%. So frankly, we are at the bottom of the pile of interest rate. This is the interest rate that the monetary policy set. So this is what government, this is where the best borrowers are borrowing. Then let me give you some knowledge to get a sense. Our neighbor Liberia, which has gone through wars, is 13.57%.
So when you borrow in Liberia, you
at the best. So even in Liberia, even at a margin of 3 to 5%, you're borrowing 18, 20%. In Ghana, we're borrowing 30, 35%. That is a huge difference. That is why our cost of business keeps going up. So we have gone from a situation, again, where in 2008, we were hovering around 13.5, 14%. We went up a little bit in 2010, then we came back to 2012, again to about 14%, and we seem to be in one direction now. We're now at 26%. Now, Nigeria, I'm talking about, Liberia, another example, Kenya is 10%, and South Africa is 7%. The cost of doing business, that becomes critical. The other area is, we all very well, is
how does this cost that we talk about affect the butcher in Malata?
Excellent. This is how it affects. So the butcher in Malata that wants to probably will not go to Barclays or one of the Eco Bank to borrow, but they will borrow from one of the smaller microfinance. So what we are saying is that if the government, which is the best credit, is borrowing at 26%, you, the butcher, the best you can do is borrow at what? 30, 35%. If you're lucky. The chances are you're probably borrowing closer to 15 to 20% a month.
And that's when you're doing it with the bank. If it is,
it's even worse.
Financial businesses.
So what we are doing, and that is what the economists call it crowding out the private sector. The government is swallowing up so much of the money, there is nothing available for the private sector. So the butcher cannot borrow to do what? To either to replace their equipment, even to keep stock. Because remember, their stock of money is also dropped because of the exchange rate and the value of what they have. So what are then the situation? The butcher is then being, so if I'm a butcher and that's in Liberia, maybe I can borrow at 20 because the base rate there's 13, 14. In Nigeria, society better. But here in Ghana, that same butcher is borrowing close to 30, 35, 40%. And that is a huge impact on your business. Let's keep with the example of the butcher. That butcher probably has a fridge or freezer to keep his meat. Now what has happened to our power? Both the pricing and the stability of our power. How many butchers do we know have closed down? Because the equipment either been blown up, because the power goes like that, huge hike, or they have not been able to do any business for a year plus, and the equipment have gone down. Because those smaller businesses, most of them cannot afford to run a generator. It's not like the larger companies who can lay people off. If the butcher lays people off, it's him alone, and maybe his wife or wife. That's it. There are two of them doing the business. So that comes to it. Then you add the cost of water. What has happened to that? To clean the meat, even to get it. The cost of transport, which is associated with the weak infrastructure, getting the meat from wherever he is to the marketplace. Even the taxi fare. Today, as I said, I had a little trip with my mechanic, and my taxi driver was telling me, oh, 50,000 cedis, what that used to do. The old 5 Ghana, the 50,000. Today, he said 5 Ghana cedis. If you try and go 400 meters, the taxi will charge you 5 Ghana cedis. So that cost is also inputted. Remember, the butcher is working with a very small margin. And so he or she has to be very, very clear in what they do. Cost of fuel I've mentioned, and then the taxes. So what then happens? This is reflected. There's a general report, and I'm taking time on this because if we do not diagnose the problem, we cannot provide solution. I think this is sometimes where we go wrong. We jump straight to the solutions without diagnosing what the problem is. And I think this has been one of our biggest fundamental problems. And that's why we ask people to come here, to come and diagnose the problem for us, which is, I mean, come on, please. You tell me we cannot diagnose our problems? We do not know that the butcher and the hairdresser and the taxi drivers are suffering? We know that. But there is a report doing business in Ghana, and I want to bring that forward. This is something that is, again, done on 138 countries around the world. So they do a business, and some of the areas they look at is like starting a business. So they do an analysis, they look at what is it like, not for a big company, for a smaller company to start a business, what are the steps you need to go through? Dealing with construction, getting electricity, registering property, etc., getting credit, etc. In 2008, Ghana was the 82nd best in the world.
So a similar report was compiled in 2008.
Same report was compiled in 2008. And there are a number of other things I want to bring forward. In that same year, Ghana was voted both in 2007 and 2008 as the top 10 reforming economies in the world.
In the world?
Global.
Not in Africa. Not in Africa,
global. That same year in 2008, we were voted the best investment destination in Africa. 4 months, 5-6 months ago, we were voted the best investment destination in West Africa. What does that tell you?
We dropped it.
We're going nowhere. Doesn't do it. And remember, while we are busy paddling, others are doing things. So that 2008, I have not even come into that. We were at 82, as I said, in 2008. The latest report we had, which was then restated, is we had 102.
Wow.
Now what that tells you is that over that period, we've gone worse. We've just, year by year, we went to 87 in 2009. By 2015, we were 97, and the last one we have is 102. What are some of the key drivers of that report? One, getting electricity. We are the 121st worst country in the world.
In terms of
getting electricity, yes. Now, you're not surprised. But the point is that is what, and the reason why I spent time to go to the butcher is because that is what is driving that. Both the cost and the ease of getting that situation. Another area, getting credit. Very difficult, very, very difficult. We don't need to tell you, people know that on the ground. So when you look at that, what that tells you is that from a purely, this is looking at from a policy perspective. Because these are activities that you can directly address. You can go and decide and say, okay, like Rwanda did. Rwanda today is 47. It takes 3 days to do everything. Everything. 3 days. And it's in the law to do the lot. Between beginning and end is 3 days. And that has been stated. Nothing stops us as a country looking at this list and saying, okay, what do we do about getting electricity? Well, finally, it seems to be something is happening. But my point is that over the past 8-year period, we have killed so many businesses. And the cost currently of our electricity tariffs compared to our neighbors is astronomical. The unit cost. And we've brought a basis that I think is not sustainable, but that's for another time. So again, I'm trying to build it because I think it's important to analyze that. So from that perspective of businesses, what has happened to the small and medium-sized businesses is that they have been squeezed on both sides. From income side, because the purchasing power of the ordinary Ghanaian has gone down. So they don't have as much money to spend. People cannot go and get the extra cloth for the seamstress to do another dress, or they will get something else done. And at the same time, their ability to do their business has become worse. Now you can flip them to the slightly larger businesses. They face similar challenges, though they have a greater ability to withstand. I was so sad when I read, I think it was this week, that Amy Rice has closed down with 500 people going home. 500 good jobs. 500. Now, if you assume that that person is looking after another 10 people.
No, let's even assume they're looking after 2.
That means 1,000 people overnight have from a situation where they were adding to the economy to not being anything at all. And remember, every year we are estimating that we get between 300,000 to 400,000 people arriving to get jobs. So that number, 9 million I talk about, is not staying still. It is going up. And the question is, are we creating? So what we know from all of this is that our businesses are contracting. That is why there's no jobs. That is why people looking for jobs, they can't find it. Because those businesses looking to employ are not employing. On the contrary, they're laying off.
Wow, that's revealing. The IMF in its report made a very interesting observation. And it looks like these revelations we're making are factors that are pushing us into such a situation. Because in this report, they said that Ghana is likely to record 3.3% growth for 2016. Yeah. And that would have been the lowest in almost 2 decades.
Since 1994. It is an embarrassment. It is an embarrassment when just a year, in 2009, we were the largest, or we were growing, I think, at about 13.5%, just 14%. And that year, Ghana had the largest growth in the world. Global. This was in the midst of the big 2008 recession. And today, we are 3.3%. And there is no guarantee that 3.3% is actually going to be realized, because it's subject to discipline. You remember what we saw at the clip? And that has been an area. The absolute lack of fiscal discipline, borrowing as if water is flowing out of it, is beyond me. You cannot keep borrowing.
You cannot keep borrowing. We'll go for a quick break, and we'll be right back. Back. Tonight we're discussing the state of the economy and jobs. And my guest for tonight is Mr. Robert Lindsay, the former CEO of Ghana Investment Promotion Council and former Vice President of Coca-Cola Africa. Sir, before we went on break, we're discussing the IMF report. The revelations that you made, really, because Ghana is not an island on its own. No. It is operating within a global economic setting, and it needs to be competitive, first of all, in order to attract foreign direct investment and in order to be able to create job opportunities for young people. Can we say that in the last 8 years, Ghana has been very, very competitive in the global political economy?
I think the very straightforward and truthful answer is no. We have not been competitive. On the contrary, I think we've become less competitive. And there are 2 factors that are driving that in terms of what in the IMF that we looked at. And I guess that is what led to the government eventually going to ask the IMF to come and help. One of the key drivers is that we seem somehow to have lost discipline across so many aspects of what we do. You see, when you're in government, when you basically have the key to the bank, you know, when you're a kid and your parents put a wallet in front of you with all the money there, you have to tell you, take what you need. But only take what you need. You take one, you say, I can take another one. You take another one, you keep taking. If you don't have the discipline, sooner or later, first of all, that becomes empty. Then you were going to go to your parents and ask, can you refill the wallet? The question is this. When you decide to embark on an economic policy, you have to be very clear about what it is that you're trying to get out of that policy. So, nobody will say in any format the borrowing per se is a bad thing. I don't think anybody can say that. Yeah. That is, I don't think not any economist worth his salt will say that. The question becomes, what do you do with the money? But before you borrow, what's the first thing you have to do? When you look, what you do as a basic, the things that I've been teaching my kids, now they're becoming adults, is have to have a budget. You know you are getting so much income into so much expenditure. Whether you're in business whether you're running your household, whether you're running your small business, whether your business is $5 billion, or whether your business is 500 Ghana cedis, you need a budget. You know how much you're going to get in, how much you're going to go out. If your revenue collection is not coming up to scratch and your expenditure is going out of
range,
you are heading to disaster. You just can't get away from that. So what have we been seeing? And I think if you look at the lecture that Dr. Baumwe gave, he gave an excellent expose of the level of borrowing that we've gone through. It is frightening. It is frightening. It is frightening in 2 points. One, the absolute amount. Look, there are countries, okay, who when they are borrowing at 7%, they think it's a crisis.
Yeah.
Okay, we are borrowing at 25, 6%, and we think that's a good thing. That is not a good thing.
And we celebrate it.
It is not, this is not sustainable.
As a sign of confidence.
No, it's a sign of bad economic management. Because if I borrow at 26%, that means I must make a return of that, of over what? 26 plus. What businesses, what investments will give you that kind of investment? That is why governments have a threshold at any economic policy about the level at which you borrow at. Once you're going past 7%, you are going to a place, look, Germany borrows at less than 0.1%. If I'm borrowing at 0 to 1%, then you have a different dynamic in terms of what you do.
Somebody would say that the case of Germany is even better because they're borrowing to invest. In our case, we borrow to redeem.
And I think this is where the second critical aspect comes in. What are you using the money for? The frightening part is that if you look at the unbelievable levels of debt we have accumulated over such a short period, from where we came to, from literally zero, we were very, very fortunate as a country. We had an opportunity, which very few countries have, to start afresh with a clean slate. We almost had debts at zero. We went first into the euro market to borrow it, if you recollect.
Yeah. In 2007.
And that was meant to be the time where we started doing things that other countries did, which is start managing ourselves in a manner that is more befitting a medium to advancing mid-income country. If you look at that money, and the question becomes, where has it been spent? Where are the productive activities that have been spent? We know that our consumption is way out. We're just consuming. You don't have it. You can't spend it. You can't consume something you can't spend. And if you are borrowing to keep, a cycle, you borrow to repay the old debt, you borrow to old to pay debt, it's going to lead to one thing, only disaster. And so I think that is why economists and everybody in Ghana has to ask the hard questions of our government that says, we voted you in to manage these economies for us, to manage this for us. Where has the money gone to? Give us a clear account of what has been invested in. Make sure there's not been consumed, because if it's consumed, we're just putting a nightmare on our children.
The IMF says we borrow to consume, and has warned of a full-blown financial crisis.
That is why it becomes even worse. So because not only have you borrowed a huge event, you have not even invested that in something that in the future you may hope to repay. So the question becomes, assuming in 2007, the NPP gets an opportunity to manage this economy, what are we going to find? What is the situation? Because we can't go back and get debt forgiveness.
No.
The debt overhang that is going to hang on this country is going to be one of the first and biggest issues that has to be addressed. Because if we don't address that, we are chasing our tail. And that is why the IMF comes in. They start putting all these policies in place to do what? To start cutting back, reducing. Now, the question I'm saying is that this discussion has been having over the past at least 5 or 6 years, the discussion about how the debt levels are going. And the constant denial is something I don't understand. The debt levels are there. And one of the fortunate elements that we live in a world where you can't hide.
You can't.
These data are available. So when I look at the current IMF that is coming, where we are now at 3.3%, they're basically warning us in a very nice and diplomatic way. If you don't stick with this, you are going to crash. That's what they're saying. In diplomatic finance, where they're saying, if you don't stick to this discipline that we've had to put you under, you will crash as an economy.
And one of said disciplines was to ensure zero central bank financing.
Exactly.
And most people were rightly skeptical that government would not stick to that in an election year.
As I state, if we do not stick with that discipline, what the IMF are telling us, we are heading towards a crash. So the question then becomes, as all commentators, we are duty-bound to hold our government accountable to make sure we keep that to level. Because let me tell you, we are all going to pay for it, and our children will pay for it. This debt is not going to get forgiven. It is not going away. We're going to have to pay.
To the next issue. I believe our viewers are much more interested in that. What would the NPP do, first of all, to ensure that we have a healthy economy that would deliver decent jobs for decent pay?
Let me start with one critical element. Any policy, any intervention you do that does not involve the three critical elements, and I'm going to quote from Dr. Bawomia's presentation. First thing starts with discipline. We have to have monetary discipline, fiscal discipline, and financial stability. If we don't address that, forget the rest. Any intervention you do is just a waste of time and money. Because if my interest rate is going to go now to 30, 40%, like what it used to be if you recall in the late 90s, and I don't have that fiscal discipline, there's no monetary policy, so we have a situation where one day somebody gets up and decides to introduce foreign exchange regime and wipes 30% of the value of everything we own. That will mean nothing. It has to start with that discipline. And you must look at what entity, what government has the ability to have that discipline. Critical. If we don't have that discipline, forget the rest. Because you are tinkering at the side if you don't have the discipline. Because everything you do, you are a good businessman, the butcher, you've been working hard, going so hard. The hairdresser has been working. Now suddenly she takes her cedis to change into dollars to go and buy some more hair. And she looks at it and said, what is this? I started $100, now I only have 70. What happened to the 30? 30 has been wiped away because of monetary ill-discipline and fiscal ill-discipline by the government. Not them, by the government. So all the gains, even your profits could have been wiped away overnight because of that. So it has to start with that. That's the main thing. The second thing, I think one is an attitudinal. And I think it's a very important. Before you start looking at specific, is an attitudinal viewpoint around what is the creator of employment. And I think that's a very, very important factor. That is the NPP a party that believes in the private sector or not? And that is a question you have to ask yourself, because I'm sorry, anybody that tells you the public sector is going to create jobs is lying. It does not happen. So you have to look at what entity has the capacity to create and encourage and foster private sector, increased private sector participation based on record, not rhetoric, record. So it's about an attitudinal viewpoint about private sector and ensuring a couple of things. One, a systematic review of all those things that are inhibiting small and medium-sized businesses. Just like happened in the previous. I told you, we went to the best reforming 2 years in a row globally. And the only way you can address the doing business issues is to reform, not tinker, reform. Go say, instead of 2 weeks, I'm going to do it in 1 day. End of discussion. Okay? Instead of being in a situation where your electricity is becoming an albatross around your neck,
you fix it.
You fix it. You can't tinker on the end. You can't triple the price to fourfold and expect people to pay it because they can't afford it. And so all you're doing is you're contracting your size of your economy. Okay, and the reason why, before I get into specifics, I think it's important because I think sometimes we are blinded by some of these, I'm going to do this, but it's also an attitudinal because you are working in a dynamic environment. The dynamic environment means you're going to have to constantly be looking at your impact and making changes to make sure you are focused. So it's about a vision. It's about ensuring, as has been very clearly stated, and I'm sure come Sunday more of it will come out. I'm not trying to jump to. It's about ensuring that the industrial base, a private sector-led growth, government discipline, government as an enabler, not as a hindrance in terms of business. ensuring that activities that we do is focused at the level of the district. It's very important. So you can't sit up there and be dictating what is going on in the village. You are whistling downwind, which means nobody's going to hear you. You've got to be very clear. Once you've done that, then there are some very specific, and at least let me indicate some of the ones that have already been said so people get a sense of what that means. Removing import duties on raw materials and machinery of production. Why does that help? We talk about the butcher. These days, or the hairdresser, these days the things I see they put on the hairdressers, those wonderful machines, they seem to be getting super and super. In fact, when I see what some of the ladies do, as I was doing my makeup coming here, they were doing all sorts of wonderful things. Those machines, these are the raw materials that go into your business. So making sure we've got rid of the duties. And what is that doing? So we are trying to put money back into the business, give them the ability, because we know they've been squeezed to be able to do that. Let me give another example. Eliminating the special import levy. When you keep squeezing the same geese that lays the egg until it will turn around and quack you and say, I'm not doing anymore. Remember, I am tired. I'm not doing anymore because I am tired. It is about expanding the size of the business, expanding the size of the employment opportunity. I want that particular butcher to hire 4 more people. I want the hairdresser and the seamstress to have 4 more people. Because you know something? If we can get 1,000 seamstresses to hire 4 more people, that's 4,000 people. Yeah. Do you know how difficult it is to get a foreign company to come in and hire 4,000 people?
It's not possible.
Very difficult. Yeah. But we have that base in terms of what is going through. Abolishing 17.5% of imported medicine not produced in Ghana. Again, what are we trying to do here? We know we don't yet have the industrial capacity to do that. So we're trying to ensure that we reduce the impediment to business growth. Because what you tend to find, and this is a fact, of parties that have a socialist tendency is they tend to tax, just tax, 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 tax. But we also know tax can be a disincentive. Yeah. You have to tax, but it has to be graduated and has to be appropriate. Abolishing 17.5% on financial services. We know that less than 10-15% of people in this country are banked. So why would you go and create more impediments for them to be in the banking sector? Because we want more of them to get access to what? To the finance. We already know finance is different. So why do you go and add another duty of a cost on it so that you make even greater impediments for people to get access to finance? Because we need to get more people banked with the introduction of mobile banking, etc. Abolishing 75% on real estate sales. I just do not understand where that came from. When you look at Grader and the members of Grader, and this, why is that important? Because they hire masons, electricians, plumbers. When everywhere else in the world that I know, when you sell a house, they have something called a stamp duty. We have the stamp duty. So why do you go and put a VAT on top of it? When you already know you have a huge shortage of property. Deficit. People cannot afford it. So why would you go and do that? It's a mindset that says, if I have a bigger pie and I tax smaller, I'll get more revenue than if I keep taxing that small one until it dies. I need to expand the pie. And that is what comes into it. And importantly, reducing VAT for micro and small enterprises from 17.5% to 3% flat. More is going to come from Sunday. But that's just to give a sense of what that is going through. But it is critical. It is absolutely critical that we start with the fiscal, monetary, and financial discipline in terms of what we do. And as people look at this, I think the question we have to ask themselves, and I would ask them to ask themselves as they look at themselves, as they come to make a decision come December, is look at the situation, your economic situation, economic, social, and personal situation that you're in. I remember December 2008, the kind of optimism, I thought we were going to take off. Yeah. I mean, take off.
We've still been laying the foundation.
We were in a situation where suddenly, first of all, I could use an ATM card because we had money that could fit into a wallet, if you remember. Yeah. We could fit into a wallet. We were in a situation where the FDI that year, foreign direct investment was the largest that we'd had at that time. Cash. And we had cash in, not the 54 million we had. We had over $870 million cash coming in that period. A good chunk of that was the Vodafone at that time. And businesses were importantly buoyant. I mean, there was a sense of optimism.
Banks were willing to offer credit.
They were coming to knock on your door. The rates were rising, but they were in the right direction. We were clearly seeing where people were going. The business case for banks to just to lend to the government was becoming less. They become more competitive. So I think people have to look at that. And in the weeks ahead, I think more of it will come specifically as to what it is that has to be done. I don't want to give away too much of the items that are coming through, but I think from Sunday, we are going to get a very, very clear idea of the specific intervention. Some of it has been talked about. We talked about one district and one factory. And sometimes people don't understand what that could translate themselves to. And I think that is what, for me, is very sad. You know, what are one of the biggest issues we've been facing? The drift towards the cities. Drift towards the cities. Yeah. We have to find a way of looking at the competitive opportunities in every single spot of our country and provide the factors of production. That is, provide them the incentive, with the government's help, to engage people to make businesses on that ground happen. Not just in a situation where everything happens in Accra, where if it's not happening in Accra, you're going to have to get onto a bus and come to Accra to engage. We have to find a way of getting on the ground. And I think that is where it becomes, and I'm not going to go into too much on that because I'm sure in the minority caucus we'll have a lot more detail.
When the manifesto is eventually out.
The bottom line, and I want to focus on that because I think we underestimate the impact of what that has. Fiscal ill-discipline. Secondly, vision. You know, they say common sense is anything but common. I don't know if you come across that saying before. Common sense is anything but common. So it is very easy to sit there and say, oh, I think we should go there. But how do you create a path? How do you create that path towards that entity or that destination you want to get to? I think that becomes important. And when you look at the specifics, not the sound bites, the specifics, how is that coming in? And one more thing I want to talk about, if we have the time, is the importance then of the foreign direct element. Because there are companies here that are folding up and leaving by the droves. And I gave the example of Avevi, that is just
laying off 500 people.
We had a global competitiveness report that came out. Again, in fact, the first time this started being done for Ghana, we actually were the ones that encouraged that to be done. And we were at 102 at that time. As of 2017, we are 114. 114 out of 138 countries in the world. Again, we're going backwards. Now, what that says, it looks much more about your competitiveness as an economy. And remember, we are competing. We can sit here in Ghana, it's nice, it's very friendly, that's all very nice. But when it comes to a hard, nail business decision, to come and take your factory and put it in our soil, bricks and mortar, you have to be competitive. Let me give you a sense of where it is that we are failing the most and where also we are doing well. And I think this also gives me the hope when I look at Ghana. Let me start with the positives. We are very innovative in Ghana, and we have sophisticated means of doing things. That's actually very simple. We are actually 67 out of 138 countries. Wow. So Ghanaians are entrepreneurial. I mean, you just have to look.
That spirit is there.
That spirit, you know, you just drive outside Joy here. Look how many people, whether it's a small kiosk, people are entrepreneurial. Somebody is going to have 2 or 3 jobs, but they're still doing things. Another thing that we're very good at is we have business sophistication. We're 68 out of 138. So we are not lemmings.
So all that we require is the government support, exactly. The conditions.
Thank you. And I want to put because that's also, we're also very innovative. We're 69th out of 138. Those are areas that give you optimistic that why are we where we are? Why are we not in the top tier? Because I don't come from the school that says that we are doomed to play in the 4th division football. I don't know if you're a football fan, but there are some football teams, maybe you're an Arsenal fan, so you don't mind ever not winning anything, so it's okay, but I don't support Arsenal. But there's some football teams that sit all the time in the 4th division. We want to progress in terms of where we are. These are the inhibitors. We are 132nd worst country out of 138 for, guess what? Macroeconomic environment. Now, all the things we discussed about tells you why that is coming through. We are 132nd out of 138, out of macro. And I hope that I've explained why the macro is so critical in everything we do. So when you are 132 out of 138 countries out of macro, you haven't got a chance of doing anything else. You're starting with your hands tied. You're going to a 100-meter race. Somebody has tied your hands behind the back and taken one of your legs away, and then they said run. You can't do that. And that is addressable. Health and primary education, something that intuitively, my sense is that Ghanaians, we are very, very smart. You think education, we had challenges, but again, we're 115th out of 138 countries. Now, these are the sorts of things that businesses, international businesses, that want to come and invest in your, look, if it's gold or oil, it's different parameters. But if we want to attract industrial-based businesses that are going to put bricks and mortar and employ our people, we need to get this right. We cannot be languishing on macroeconomic, because they're not going to accept one day the value of their sales being 10, next 3 months later being 7. They won't stay. Sorry, I think.
We cannot be languishing on macroeconomics. We need to be very, very stable. I'll quickly take some messages from our viewers. This one from Dennis, Akachi, Volta region, and he says that we Voltarians, we are not ready for the NDC again. And this one from Gideon Austin from Caucus, and he writes, I'm not into partisanship, but it's very clear that the NPP has the men to fix the economy. Perfect revelations by your guest. And this one from Francis, also from Volta region, and he says that, good evening, your guest really spoke and convinced me that the NPP is full of brilliant, focused, and foresight people, not propagandists. You have listened to it all, the NPP's diagnosis of the state of our economy and its solutions to dealing with the terrifying levels of unemployment in our country. In 2007, when Akufo-Addo declared his intention to lead our country, he quoted with approval a profound statement made by John F. Kennedy, that if a free society cannot save the many who are poor, it cannot save the few who are rich. Fairness is essential, or we cannot play ball at all. Since then, Akufo-Addo has been very consistent in his view that the only way we can sustain this democracy is to build an economy which would cater for all, regardless the circumstances of your birth or origin or religion. And he believes that government has a critical role to play in this journey towards ensuring that Ghana become the nation that we all yearn for, and that given the opportunity, he would assemble a team of competent men and women in order to be able to build our country to deal with all the many challenges confronting us. See you next week for yet another interesting edition of Minority Caucus. Good night.